The sun hung low over the dusty main street of Cedar Flats, casting long shadows across splintered boardwalks and sun-faded storefronts. Rira swept the porch of Murphy's General Store, her frayed dress stirring in the desert wind, when the sharp cracks of gunfire shattered the quiet 3 shots, fast, followed by shouting and the thunder of hooves. Then she saw him. An Apache warrior stumbled between 2 buildings, clutching his bleeding shoulder. His buckskin shirt was torn and stained crimson, his long black hair matted with sweat and dust. Behind him, angry voices roared, "Find that red devil," Townsend's voice barked like a rifle blast. "He's bleeding bad, he can't have gotten far." Rira froze. Her heart slammed against her ribs. Everyone in Cedar Flats knew the unspoken rule. Shoot first, don't ask. But then the warrior locked eyes with her, not with rage, but with raw humanity, pain, urgency, fear, and something else, a flicker of trust. Without a word, Rira dropped her broom and ran. She reached him just as he staggered, grabbing his good arm and pulling him behind Murphy's store. "This way," she whispered, though she doubted he understood, but he followed, stumbling along with labored breath. She led him into a cramped supply room, stacked with grain sacks and dusty crates. It was dark, musty, and barely big enough for them both, but it would have to do. Footsteps thundered outside, Townsend's men yelling and spreading out. Rira knelt beside the warrior, hands trembling as she tore strips from her petticoat. The bullet had gone clean through no fragments, but he was losing blood fast. She pressed the fabric against the wounds, her hands soaked in red within seconds. He didn't flinch, just watched her with fierce, unblinking eyes. "Why am I doing this?" she whispered to herself. There was no answer, only the heavy silence of shared danger. The store creaked under heavy boots. Murphy stammered nervously. "I ain't seen nothing. Mr. Townsend, I been in the back, counting inventory." "Search it anyway," Townsend snapped. "He's bleeding. He needs shelter." Rira pressed herself against the wall, heart hammering. The Apache, she still didn't know his name, remained still, breathing shallow but controlled. Even wounded, he was a warrior. Then the door slammed open. Townsend filled the doorway like a thundercloud, 3 armed men behind him. "Well, well," he said softly, venom in every syllable. "Look what we got here." Rira stood slowly, shielding the wounded man. "He's hurt. Mr. Townsend. He needs medical attention." Townsend scoffed. "Medical attention. That savage killed 3 of our men at the Mitchell place. He don't need bandages, he needs a noose." "You don't know it was him." Rira shot back. "You're guessing." "Doesn't matter," he growled. "What matters is, you just committed treason." The accusation hit like a punch to the chest. In Cedar Flats, helping an Apache didn't make you kind, it made you a threat. There was no forgiveness for what she had done, no trial, no second chances. As Townsend's men dragged the warrior out, still bleeding, he looked back at Rira just for a second. There was something in his eyes that made her stomach tighten. Not just pain, not even gratitude. Something deeper. Recognition. Townsend sneered. "Pack your things, girl. You've got 1 hour. Then you walk." Rira didn't speak. She couldn't. Her hands were still stained with the Apache's blood, and her voice had dried up with the last of her illusions. Behind her, the town murmured with judgment, but she didn't regret it, not 1 second of it. She moved like a ghost through the alley behind the store, her feet numb, her thoughts racing. Townsend's voice shouted orders in the distance. Make sure she leaves post a watch, back in her room. She grabbed a canvas bag and threw in what little she had. Then her fingers brushed something wrapped in oilcloth at the bottom of her trunk. She hesitated, unwrapped it slowly. The silver badge gleamed. Ooh, Federal Marshal, not a sheriff's tin star, not some frontier novelty. The real thing, heavy with duty, etched with authority. She stared at it for a long time, remembering the power it once held and the betrayal that took it from her. Then she pulled out the small pistol hidden beneath her spare dress. 6 shots, enough to make the desert fear her. If they thought they were casting her out to die, they were wrong. They weren't getting rid of a problem. They were about to unleash one. The town of Cedar Flats shrank behind her like a fading stain against the endless desert horizon, her canvas bag slung over one shoulder, pistol tucked beneath her coat. Rira walked with steady purpose. The sun was brutal, the wind dry as bone, but she didn't stagger like a woman cast out to die. She walked like someone heading towards something she already knew was there. 3 miles out, she found it a formation of red rocks clustered in a crescent, half buried in sand and invisible from a distance. She had scouted it months ago when old instincts told her peace wouldn't last. The place was dry, but it offered shade and cover, and in the desert, that was life. She dropped her bag beneath the tallest rock, took a slow drink from her canteen, and listened. Nothing but wind for now. Rira leaned her head against the stone, and the past came rushing back bloodier than any memory should be. Denver. She'd spent 8 months undercover in the Castellano ring, posing as a courier, earning their trust, passing intel back to Washington. It had been dangerous work, but it was going well until everything fell apart in one night of screams and fire. Agent Morrison had died in her arms, a bullet through his chest. 3 more marshals dead by dawn. And when the dust settled, someone pointed the finger at her. No trial, just silence, just shame. The agency needed a scapegoat, and she was the only one still breathing. So she disappeared, changed her name, wandered west and became someone else. Sarah Mitchell, store clerk, nobody special. But the desert didn't care what name you wore. It just waited to test what was underneath. Rira climbed to the highest rock and pulled a small mirror from her bag, worn, scratched, but still serviceable. She caught the sun and angled the mirror in a series of flashes, 3 long, 2 short, 3 long again. The old martial distress signal. She didn't know if anyone was close enough to see it, didn't even know if anyone in the service still trusted her. But she sent it anyway. The wind blew warm across her face as she lowered the mirror and whispered, "Please, Sam, if you're out there." Then she waited and loaded her pistol. They didn't want the desert to kill her slowly. That would have been too clean. She spotted them an hour later, 5 riders, their horses kicking up long trails of dust. Townsend at the front, shoulders hunched with rage. One man carried a coil of rope slung across his saddle horn. This wasn't a chase, it was an execution party. But she wasn't the same woman they exiled. Rira stacked dry brush beside the rock, struck a match, and let the smoke curl into the sky, one last message to anyone watching. Then she pressed her back to the stone, pistol drawn, breathing steady. Let them come. The badge lay in her palm, cold against the heat of her skin. Federal Marshal. Not a memory anymore. Not a burden. A weapon. She pinned it to her vest, the silver catching the desert sun like a beacon. Then she pulled out the mirror again and flashed another pattern, this one sharper. Faster. Confirmation. Distress active. Armed. Pursued. Townsend's voice rose in the distance. She's around here, don't let her slip away. She tucked the mirror back into her bag and crouched behind the rocks. There was no more hiding, no more pretending. They thought they were hunting a traitor. What they didn't know was that they were about to face a trained federal agent with nothing left to lose and everything to prove. Just as the heat and silence pressed in, a low thunder rolled across the canyon floor, not a storm, but hooves. 100 strong. Rira peeked over the rock and froze. From the ridge above, riders emerged like ghosts from a legend. They wore the blue of say, cavalry, but something about them was off, their movements too sharp, their uniforms too clean, their weapons too modern. These weren't soldiers. They were federal marshals, and at their head rode a man she hadn't seen in 2 years, Marshal Samuel Hayes. He sat tall in the saddle, his weathered face scanning the canyon like he'd never stopped looking for her. When his voice cut through the air, it brought the desert to a halt. Federal Marshal Service. Lay down your weapons. Townsend's men turned in confusion, rifles wavering. But Garrett Walsh didn't hesitate. His jaw clenched, eyes flashing with panic as he realized the game was over. Rira saw his hand twitch toward his pistol and shouted, "He's the one, Garrett Walsh. He's the leak from Denver. Walsh didn't aim at her." He turned and fired point blank into Townsend's chest, sending the old man sprawling, then kicked his horse hard and bolted toward the canyon mouth. His escape was fast, clean almost, but not clean enough. Rira stood without thinking, raised her pistol, and squeezed the trigger twice. The shots echoed sharp and final. Walsh's body pitched from the saddle, crumpling in the dust like a broken scarecrow. The desert went quiet again, except for the ragged breath of men who had almost made the worst mistake of their lives. Marshal Hayes rode down from the ridge as silence settled over the canyon. His men fanned out with precision, securing weapons and tending to the wounded. He stopped in front of Rira and dismounted slowly, eyes never leaving hers. "Marshal Isabella Castellanos," he said, voice steady with something like pride. "Took us long enough." She looked down at the badge on her vest, the sun glinting off the worn silver. "I wasn't sure I'd ever wear this again." "Good thing you did," he said. "Looks like you just saved a hell of a lot of lives." The sound of more hooves rose from the south trail. Everyone turned. This time, it wasn't an army, it was the people of Cedar Flats. Doc Peterson rode at the front, pale and shaken. Behind him came Murphy, Martha Henley, and a dozen others who'd once called for Rira's exile. They looked like they'd been riding hard, sweat staining their shirts, faces tight with regret. Peterson dismounted awkwardly, hands trembling as he pulled a yellow telegram from his vest. We got word from Fort Collins. About Garrett Walsh, about Denver, about who you really are." He swallowed hard. "They said you were a decorated marshal, that you were framed, that you were trying to stop Castellano the whole time." Murphy stepped forward, eyes downcast. "We were wrong. About you. About the Apache, too. Turns out the man you saved was fighting Castellano's supply lines, not raiding settlers." Rira listened, but her face didn't soften. She had bled for this badge. She had nearly died in silence. She turned slowly to face the crowd, her voice calm but cutting. "You were ready to let me die because I showed mercy. You locked up a man trying to stop a war because of his skin, and now you think a telegram makes it right." No one answered. The weight of her words hung thick in the air. Hayes crossed his arms, his voice cool. "Ignorance nearly cost you 2 federal agents and a war you don't understand." Martha Henley stepped forward, tears in her eyes. "We want to make it right." Rira's jaw tightened. "Then listen closely. You've got one chance left, because what's coming next won't wait for you to catch up." She turned to Hayes. "We need Swift Eagle, now. If he's still alive, we need his intel before it's too late." Hayes nodded. "Then we better move fast, Because if Castellano's still out there, we're on the clock. The jail behind Murphy's saloon was little more than a wooden cage, but Swift Eagle sat inside it with the stillness of a war chief, blood crusted on his shoulder, the bandages Rira had tied now stiff and dark. When she approached, now wearing the marshal badge, his gaze shifted with quiet understanding. "You are not who they thought you were," he said, his voice clear and composed. "Neither are you," Rira replied, unlocking the cell with keys Doc Peterson had reluctantly handed over. Hayes stepped into view. Tone professional but respectful. "Federal Marshal Samuel Hayes. We received word you've been trying to contact us about Castellano's weapons trafficking." Swift Eagle gave a single, solemn nod. "For 3 moons I have tracked him. He sells rifles to young Apache and tells them the whites will slaughter their families. Then he rides to settlers, spreading lies that we plan genocide. He profits while we bleed." The room fell silent, every face slowly absorbing the terrifying clarity of it all. Castellano wasn't just running guns, he was engineering a war. "How many weapons are we talking about?" Rira asked, her voice tight. Swift Eagle met her eyes. "Enough to arm every warrior in 3 tribes. Hayes cursed under his breath. "What else?" The warrior hesitated only a moment. "He has shown forged orders to War Chief Whitehawk, falsely claiming the U.S. Army will destroy sacred Apache burial grounds. Whitehawk has united the clans. At dawn, they will attack the army depot at Copper Canyon." Rira stiffened. "There's no ammunition at Copper Canyon." "Medical supplies," Hayes confirmed grimly. "Blankets, food. If White Hawk strikes, the army will see it as an act of war." Swift Eagle's voice dropped. "And they will strike back. Hard." The full picture snapped into place. Castellano had created a perfect storm, Apache warriors convinced they were fighting extermination, settlers bracing for a massacre. Both sides unknowingly fed lies from the same hand. If they didn't stop it in time, the bloodshed would be irreversible. Rira paced, eyes scanning maps and timelines in her mind. "We could ride to the depot and warn the army. But even if we stop one battle, Whitehawk still believes the lie, and Castellano will move the spark elsewhere. We could try to reach Whitehawk directly," Hayes offered, though doubt laced his tone. "He won't listen to white men," Swift Eagle replied quietly, not with war in his heart. Silence settled over the group, thick and heavy. Every option felt like a delay. Every delay meant more death. Then Rira looked up, eyes sharp. "Then we don't chase the fire. We find the one holding the match." Hayes straightened. "You're talking about taking Castellano himself." "Alive," she confirmed. "He's the only one who can confess under Apache ritual for Whitehawk, under federal testimony for the army." Hayes raised an eyebrow. "We don't even know where he is." "I do," Swift Eagle said. 5 miles north. Dead Horse Canyon. 20 men guard him." No one spoke, but they all knew what was being asked. Not a raid, a suicide mission. Rira looked around at the ragtag group, 15 federal marshals, a dozen townspeople, some armed with rifles that hadn't been fired in years. "The odds don't matter," she said, steady as iron. "If we don't stop Castellano tonight, tomorrow this entire territory will be on fire." Doc Peterson stepped forward, holding his medical bag like a soldier holds a shield. "I'm coming. There'll be wounded ours or theirs." Murphy followed, awkward but firm. "I'll shoot if I have to." Martha Henley nodded beside him, fear plain on her face but resolve stronger. One by one, they stepped forward, people who had exiled Rira, people who had branded Swift Eagle a savage, people now willing to risk their lives to fix it. Swift Eagle turned to Rira, voice low. "You trust them?" She hesitated only a second. I trust what they're willing to do now. He nodded once. Then so will I. As Hayes began organizing positions and routes under moonlight, Rira drifted to the edge of the group, staring out toward the black line of canyon shadows on the horizon. If they succeeded, they might stop a war before it began. But if they failed, hundreds would die, maybe thousands. She touched the badge pinned to her vest, feeling the weight of what it meant, not a job, but a promise. And maybe, for the first time since Denver, she felt worthy of it again. Swift Eagle approached beside her, silent. After a moment, she said, "If we make it out of this, things won't go back to how they were." He nodded. Good. They shouldn't. Then, as the group mounted their horses and turned north, Rira exhaled slowly and whispered to the desert, "Tonight, we stop the war before it starts." And she meant every word. The moon hung low and full as the group reached the jagged edges of Dead Horse Canyon. The rocks rose like tombstones in the dark, sharp against a sky bruised with stars. Rira crouched behind a boulder, peering through the scope of a borrowed rifle. Below them, Castellano's camp flickered with firelight maps spread across crates, guards leaning against rifles. Laughter too casual for men this close to war. 23 men. Swift Eagle's count had been close. But in this game, 3 extra guns could mean the difference between ending a war and being buried at the start of one. At the center of it all, Castellano stood beside the fire, tall, silver-haired, wrapped in a black duster like a villain from an old story, even from a distance. Rira could see the gleam in his eyes. He wasn't afraid. He was savoring the calm before the chaos he'd created. Hayes moved into position beside her, face pale beneath the brim of his hat. "My marshals have the North Ridge. Your townsfolk are flanking from the south. Swift Eagles circling around back to cut off the exit." Rira gave a tight nod, heart thudding. It wasn't perfect, but it was enough. It had to be. Around her, the makeshift force steadied rifles, checked ammunition, whispered final prayers. She looked to Murphy, to Martha Henley, to Doc Peterson, all wide-eyed but unwilling to run. Then she turned to them and said, voice low and even, "Remember, Castellano lives. We need his confession to stop the war. If he dies tonight, we lose everything." They nodded, some grimly, some with fear in their eyes, but no one argued. Not after all they'd seen. The signal came, a soft nightbird call from Hayes's Ridge. It was time. Rira stood, stepped out from the shadows, and into the firelight. Her badge caught the flames as she raised her voice. "Castellano, you, Federal Marshal, you're under arrest." The camp erupted. Men scrambled for rifles, shouting warnings. Muzzle flashes lit up the canyon. Bullets slammed into stone. But Castellano smiled. He rose slowly, hands empty, calm as ever. "Marshal Isabella Castellanos," he said, her name curling off his tongue like poison laced with silk. "I was beginning to wonder if you'd survived Denver." Rira kept her rifle on him, even as chaos exploded around them. "It ends tonight. You think this is about guns?" he asked, raising his voice over the gunfire. "This is about truth. When blood covers the sand tomorrow, the world will see what I've always known. Civilization is just a myth we tell ourselves." Rira fired once into the air, not to hit, but to force his men lower. Castellano didn't flinch. He turned his back on her and started walking toward Swift Eagle's position. "If I can't have my war," he shouted, "I'll start it with one dead Apache." Rira didn't hesitate. She squeezed the trigger. The shot cracked across the canyon. Castellano spun, his pistol flying from his hand, his coat twisting with the force of the impact. He hit the ground hard, clutching his shoulder, mouth twisted in agony. "You shot me," he spat, more shocked than hurt. "Your gun arm," she said, stepping toward him. "You'll live, and you'll talk." To both sides. Behind her. The last of his men were falling back or throwing down their weapons. Hayes's marshals closed in with swift precision. The townspeople, tired, bruised, but alive, emerged from behind rocks, stunned by their own survival. They hadn't just held the line. They'd helped turn the tide. Rira dropped beside Castellano and began binding his wound with strips torn from her own shirt. Rough justice, but enough to keep him breathing. "White Hawk won't believe words from white men," Swift Eagle said quietly as he approached. "But he'll listen to a confession spoken under Apache truth ritual." Hayes nodded. "And the army will listen to documented evidence from a federal inquiry." They had what they needed to stop the war, but the sun was rising fast, and both sides were still armed, still ready to strike. Rira stood and looked across the canyon. Castellano groaned in the dust at her feet. His dreams of carnage had failed, but the wound he'd opened across this land would take more than one dawn to heal. Still, they had a chance now, and that was more than they'd had the day before. Dawn broke over Dead Horse Canyon in streaks of fire and gold, painting bloodstains and bootprints in warm light. Castellano sat bound near the ashes of his fire, his shoulder bandaged in rough fabric, his silver hair tangled and soaked with sweat. He looked smaller now, not defeated, just exposed. Swift Eagle stood nearby, his stance calm but firm. "White Hawk will not believe the words of white men," he said evenly. "But he will believe the confession of a known enemy, spoken under Apache truth ritual." Hayes nodded beside Rira, his arms crossed. "And the U.S. Army won't move without documented testimony and hard evidence. We'll need both if we're going to stop the fighting before it starts." Rira glanced down at Castellano. He didn't speak. His silence was a threat in itself. Within the hour, dispatch riders were on the trail in opposite directions, one headed east to intercept White Hawk, the other toward Copper Canyon to warn the army. They carried written confessions, forged documents recovered from Castellano's camp, and official orders signed by Hayes himself. It wasn't just about stopping one attack anymore. It was about undoing the web of lies spun across a dozen border towns, tribal camps, and military posts. Rira watched the riders disappear across the horizon. The sun climbed higher, and with it, the stakes. "We bought ourselves time," Hayes said. "Not much, but maybe enough." Rira's jaw tightened. "Let's not waste it." Later that morning, as the group prepared to ride back to Cedar Flats, Doc Peterson rode up beside Rira. He cleared his throat, eyes flicking toward the silver badge still pinned to her vest. "So, you going back to being our store clerk?" Now, Rira didn't answer at first. She looked at the tired, dust-covered townspeople around her. Murphy, red-faced and quiet. Martha Henley, hands shaking slightly as she repacked her rifle. Even the blacksmith, his pride swallowed behind clenched teeth. These were the same people who had cast her out into the desert to die, and now they had followed her into a canyon filled with killers and stood their ground. "No," she finally said, "I'm not going back to sweeping porches." They reached the ridge that overlooked the town by early afternoon. Cedar Flats shimmered below in the heat, the same dusty rows of buildings, but something about it looked different now. It didn't look like exile. It looked like unfinished business. "This town needs a sheriff," Rira said, loud enough for all of them to hear. "Not someone who picks sides, not someone who asks what color you are before asking what's right. Hayes raised an eyebrow. You volunteering, I'm not asking permission, she replied, and I'm not taking orders from fear anymore. She turned to the townspeople. If we're going to stop men like Castellano from doing this again, it starts here with all of you. You want forgiveness. Earn it. Swift Eagle rode up beside her and surveyed the town in silence. A good sheriff, he said, will need to understand both peoples, both ways of thinking. Rira looked over, a faint smile breaking through the dust. Are you offering to be my deputy? No, he said, calm as ever. I'm offering to be a bridge, so that this, he gestured back toward the canyon, toward the ruins of Castellano's lies, never happens again. She held his gaze. No need for more words. They'd both lost too much to let it all go to waste now. As the group began the descent into Cedar Flats, Rira reached up and touched the badge on her chest. This time, it didn't feel like a relic. It felt like a beginning. As they rode into Cedar Flats, the town held its breath. Storefront doors creaked open. Faces appeared in windows. Children peered out from behind skirts. Just days ago, these same people had watched Rira walk into the desert like a condemned soul. Now, they watched her return flanked by federal marshals, townspeople, and an Apache warrior. She dismounted slowly, boots crunching against sun-baked dirt, every step quiet but deliberate. She didn't glare, didn't grandstand. She simply walked past Murphy's store, the place where she had once swept the porch, and kept going. Not with vengeance, with purpose. By late afternoon, the town square had filled. Marshal Hayes stood beside her. So did Swift Eagle. Rira stepped forward, hands steady, voice calm but undeniable. This town came close to war, not because of Apache raids, not because of the army, but because fear made us blind. Castellano fed you lies, and you swallowed them because they confirmed what you already believed. That's on all of us. No one interrupted. I'm not asking for an apology, she continued. I'm asking for accountability, starting today. Cedar Flats doesn't get to pretend it stands for law unless it stands for justice, for everyone. The silence that followed wasn't ashamed. It was humbled, heavy, real. Swift Eagle stepped beside her. For a heartbeat. The crowd tensed. Then he spoke clear, fluent, and firm. We came here in peace. We stayed quiet when you feared us. We fought your enemy in the shadows while you thought we were your threat. He paused. But we are still here, and we are still willing to build something better. That moment, the quiet strength in his voice, the simplicity of the truth struck deeper than any speech ever could. In that silence, something old and bitter cracked open. In the following days, things didn't transform overnight, but they shifted. Doc Peterson treated wounded Apache without hesitation. Murphy hired a young native boy to help in the store. The blacksmith left a jug of clean water near the edge of town for anyone. No questions asked. And Rira, she reopened the old sheriff's office, cleaned it, sanded down the rot, hung her U.S. Marshal badge behind glass and pinned a new one, local and worn, on her vest. Sheriff. She didn't carry the badge to show authority. She carried it as a reminder of what happens when you don't listen, when you look away, when you let fear make your choices, and of what it takes to undo all of that. On the edge of town, under the same sun that once beat down on her exile, Rira stood beside Swift Eagle, both looking west toward the horizon. Think they'll keep listening, she asked. Some will, he said, some won't. But that's not what matters. Then what does she ask quietly? He looked out toward the hills. That you keep saying the truth anyway. She smiled, slow and genuine, then turned back toward town. Cedar Flats was still rough, still imperfect, but for the first time it felt honest. As the dust settled and the sky turned golden, the sheriff walked into her town not to keep it the same, but to make sure it never was again.